Sonic, the heart of your system.
I'm Leo Walder for Kit Guru. This is Leo Says number 38. My roundup of news and stuff that has caught my attention. Nvidia, always a good place to start. They launched GTX 1660 Ti, a non-ray tracing part, hence it's GTX, not RTX. Dominic's review makes it crystal clear what's going on. A good piece of hardware. Apparently there'll also be a regular 1660 non-Ti and maybe a 1650 sometime in March. The rumours on that seem absolutely solid. Although I personally had no official information, otherwise I wouldn't be able to say it. It seems clear that Nvidia launched GTX 1660 Ti purely to beat AMD Polaris RX 590, and they've done a really good job of that. It wins in terms of performance, price and power draw. They've priced it, frankly, I think a tad high, but they've priced it just low enough that it makes RX 590 look like a poor purchase. So in that sense, they've done an absolutely fine job. It is only slightly cheaper than RTX 2060, so to my mind, the common sense approach is to buy RTX 2060 because the saving is minimal. It's like $50 or maybe even £30. And considering that RTX is supposed to come good in time, and assuming you keep your graphics card for a few years, people that buy mid-range graphics cards do not generally update them all the time. So if you're buying a graphics card now and you want to spend about $300 on it, RTX to my mind is the better move than this GTX 1660 Ti. But the funny thing about this is that everything that Jensen Huang said at the launch of RTX about ray tracing and RTX on, boom, it goes by the wayside. This graphics card doesn't have it. And that puts Nvidia in a slightly curious position. They're saying, look, here's this perfectly competent refinement of the previous technology, and look, it doesn't have ray tracing, and yet it's really good. It just wins across the board. And it makes you wonder what would happen if they brought out a GTX, what would it be, 1880 Ti? Possibly, oh God knows, I mean, you can't really extrapolate those numbers. Nonetheless, the non-ray tracing version of RTX 2080, were they to bring that out and cut the price down sensibly, then that could be really compelling, which I'm quite sure is the reason why they're not going to bring it out, because if they did, well, that's it, we'll have that rather than Pascal, thank you very much. So, a curious thing, the marketing message previously, ray tracing on, RTX on, you must have this thing, and now we have this other thing that proves the precise opposite, and yet those two marketing messages never touch, they pass in the night. Meanwhile, Nvidia messaging further, DLSS, when I did video at CES and I was saying we'd misunderstood what DLSS was all about and how it's meant to render at a lower resolution and then output at a higher resolution such that you get decent performance. And DLSS, we've had how many? 3, 4 driver updates. We've testing laptops with RTX mobile graphics has been a real pain in the neck. We first had the Windows update that enabled DirectX R, then we had and came with DirectX R, and then we had a series of driver updates, and I think we've had 4 driver updates in recent times. Bish. And DLSS is now a thing. We've had Port Royal from UL as a benchmark, and then Battlefield 5 obviously now allows you to play around with the setting, and people are not happy. They just are not. Hardware Unboxed in particular seems to have absolutely really gone to town on this, justifiably so. They have demonstrated that 4K performance of DLSS has similar performance levels to if you render at 1800p. The trouble is the image quality is not great. Now, Nvidia has acknowledged this, in fairness to them, and they said this would be a learning experience. I mean, it is after all deep learning, so therefore literally a learning experience. As things stand right now, what they're offering a DLSS, it's not compelling. It just isn't. The way you get back performance is you blur stuff and make it imprecise. Well, you might as well play at a low resolution and have done with it. It's also aggravating that the permutations you can have of resolution and whether DLSS is enabled or not, there are technical reasons for the way Nvidia has done what it has done, but it looks frustrating. You say, well, I'd like to have it at this resolution, please, and those and it's like, no, you take what the great machine in the sky lets you have, or you turn it off. It's one or the other. Not satisfactory. Hopefully it's going to get better, because otherwise it means the whole RTX thing's just a busted flush. But these are very early days, and this is very much the first step along that particular road to real proper ray tracing. So as things stand, we now have the pieces. We have ray tracing, we have DLSS, we have drivers, and we have more drivers. And right now it's not looking good. Having said that, we've got very few games that use ray tracing, 2. So clearly we need the software that's going to use it. It could turn out that Battlefield 5 is part of the problem. It's perfectly possible. But as things stand right now, it's happening, but not in a compelling way. Things that are gonna happen: Intel 9th gen CPUs for notebooks. So CES we had RTX graphics and we had 8th gen CPUs, and the impression we got, and I think I said this in a previous video, is that the rumours at CES were that when Intel brought out the 9th gen sometime in Q2, common sense says in time for Computex, that Core i5, Core i7 CPUs would essentially be unchanged. Core i9 would bring you 8 core 16 thread. Well, it would seem this is correct up to a point, not 100% correct. AnandTech's got their hands on a table of processors. So the top of the tree, Core i9 9980HK, 8 core 16 thread. Core i7 9858, 8 core 8 threads, so much as they've done with the desktop. Core i5 9400H, 4 cores, 8 threads. Now the turbo speeds for those, they're varyingly 4.8 GHz, 4.6 GHz, 4.3 GHz, but we're talking 45 watt parts, and 45 watt parts suggest the base clock will be low. I've just recently done a PC Specialist laptop, a great big beast of a thing, 4.3 kilos for the laptop plus 1.5 kilos for the power brick. It's 40 mil thick, it's huge. And that has a desktop i9 9900K in it. They'd limited it to 65 watts from the desktop 95 watt part, and we know desktop parts draw more than TDP. 65 watts limited the clock speeds quite dramatically, 3.6 gigahertz from memory. Don't hold me to that, but I think I'm right. So 45 watts for 8 core and 8 core 8 thread, 8 core 16 thread parts. We can expect to see all core turbo speeds being really slashed. The fact they'll boost momentarily to 4.6, 4.8, sure, but after a short time they're going to pull back, and they'll pull back hard. Quite sure of that. Nonetheless, the fact those processors are happening, that's good, that's interesting. Ask yourself, however, how excited are you by huge numbers of CPU cores in laptops? I mean, obviously it depends how thin the laptop ends up being, how hot it gets, how noisy it is. We have to see how this works in practice. But the fact this hardware is coming through, after all, the fact Intel produces 8-core laptop parts, it doesn't mean we've got to buy them. It's just nice to have the option. If it means that quad-core continues to be the thing, great. In this instance, Core i5 9400H appears like an entirely reasonable part, but once again, what the all-core speed is, that's going to be the thing. A quick boost followed by meh, that's not so exciting. But it's going to be a significant range of hardware, and I really hope we see that for Computex, in which case we should have a whole bunch of interesting new laptops. Moving over to the rumour side of things, Apple apparently will produce a 16-inch MacBook Pro. When they killed the 17-inch MacBook Pro, that was just a terrible thing to do. Pros like big screens because you're working with photos and now videos. Of course, you want to be able to see the blessed thing. Working on a little screen, not so good. So the 15-inch MacBook Pro and then the baby 13, which isn't really a Pro at all, not so hot. Not so good, rather, hot being a different thing. So 17-inch used to be where it's at. 16-inch would be a curious form factor. The thinking is that they might be producing a MacBook Pro that is edge-to-edge display, so the chassis might actually have the footprint of a 15 point something, in which case a big-ish screen on a smallish laptop, well, that could be a good thing. How they do that's going to remain to be seen, because what Apple really needs to do is to help out the innards of the laptops with some cooling. They have been suffering with heat, processors running too hot, throttling back and all the rest of it. If they make the chassis probably more bulky would be the sensible way of doing it, but if they can come up with some innovative cooling system, well, that would also do the trick as well. But I don't really see what they can do in a laptop. If it's thin, well, you're limited by physics. And when that laptop comes out, whenever this may be, we have to assume that the graphics will be updated. Apple slipped out Radeon Pro Vega graphics relatively recently. As far as I'm aware, there was no announcement, it just kind of happened. Of course, what we want to see is Navi. Now, Navi goodness knows when that's happening in 2019 now. If indeed it is happening in 2019, we have to hope it is. But Navi would be the natural next progression. So 16-inch MacBook Pro, presumably with 9th gen CPU, and the next gen AMD graphics. Well, that sounds like a compelling package, but that's, chunks of speculation right there. Nonetheless, as and when that happens, look forward to seeing what Apple does, whether they change what they've been doing in recent times and make things better, because they've had some howlers. Actually, they continue to sell ridiculous quantities of hardware, but they do make some mistakes. A very short piece here. Gigabyte's Xeon motherboard for the Xeon W375X has been named as the C621, which is the chipset, Aorus Extreme. Not an imaginative name, but it tells the lie to something I said the other week when I thought the Gigabyte's board had just gone missing. We saw the Asus ROG Dominus at CS, saw a number of examples of it here, there and everywhere, including obviously with Asus, but also at the Fantex booth and Inwin. I think Inwin had one in their monster case, but nonetheless that board was around and about with different cooling systems on it, and it seems that Gigabyte is still in the fight. As to when these boards will be available, that's the next question, because at the moment they appear to be sort of showing up as examples of the technology rather than things you can actually buy. I mentioned Mobile World Congress, MWC. Naturally, it was about 5G because it's bound to be. 5G's happening this year. It's going to be rolled out according to... It's Qualcomm, we're talking about it at CES. Due to be rolled out across the UK, among other countries, but that's the country I was paying attention to, because if it sort of appears in one bit of London, it's like, well, great, but it appears to actually be hitting sort of 10 significant towns across the country. If they're doing 10 in the UK, you have to, well, I assume they're hitting many places across the rest of Europe, America, presumably Asia. So, because after all, places like South Korea and Taiwan are way ahead of the UK when it comes to mobile connections. So 5G, looking forward to seeing that. Obviously, once you've got the infrastructure, we all know about the Huawei aggravation with security and such like. So we're not entirely sure which backbone hardware is going to be used and which base stations are going to be installed, but presumably it's all going to happen from one make or another, and then you need the handsets, and then hopefully you've got a super fast connection. But the real news from MWC was folding phones, specifically the Samsung Galaxy Fold, which is like a paperback book. We saw, I can't remember the name of it, we saw a folding phone at CES. I mean, it was over there. Did actually get up close to it, had a quick play with it. It felt quite, you had to sort of bend the plastic into place, but nonetheless the fact you can actually do it was good. But the principle of the paperback book folding like that was like, well, now the screen's, and you have to open it to look at the screen. That wasn't, to my mind, particularly exciting. Innovative but not exciting. The Samsung Galaxy Fold, $2,000 US, so like, wow. But then I suppose it is effectively two phones, kind of. The Huawei Mate X, or I'm not sure if it's Mate X or Mate 10, that has two, you fold it, and you've got a screen on the outside and another screen on the outside, but when you open it, you've got this 8-inch screen that you can then use as like a phablet. That looks absolutely remarkable. In the video I've seen, I hasten to add, I haven't actually seen one up close in person, $2,300. So whether this is just purely the initial models just being talked about of these devices, or whether this is actually going to be how much these things will cost in the future, I mean, that's a hell of a lot of money. Nonetheless, the fact it's happening, that's interesting and impressive. So we want more of that, thank you very much. And did I see that Apple's done a patent application for a folding phone? I'm stunned they haven't done this already, because the idea is obvious as to what you bring to the party, what your new IP is. Well, that's a different question. But the idea that Apple hasn't seen that folding screens is going to be a thing, that would stun me. They must have done years ago. It's just a question of actually making it. And then we end with the comedy news that other people have covered, but I'm still equally appalled, so I'm going to say my piece as well. USB and its naming. So we had USB 3.0, which is when the Type A connectors changed to blue, and they were fast, and that was good. And then we had the introduction of Type C, which is a physical form factor. but it's what's going through the cable we're interested in here. And then USB 3.1 came along, and that was obviously better. And then we had this shenanigans with naming. So we had USB 3.0 was renamed as USB 3.1 Gen 1. That was a 5 gigabit connection. USB 3.1 Gen 2, 10 gigabit connection. So they renamed that as that, which made no sense. It made perfect sense to have the slow one as USB 3.0, the fast one as USB 3.1, but they didn't do that. USB 3.2 is due to, it was announced back in 2017, but we've now got the naming scheme for it. It's due to break cover during this year, and we will have USB 3.2 in 5, 10 and 20 gigabit versions. But here's where it gets absolutely bonkers. What was USB 3.0 became USB 3.1 Gen 1 is now going to be called USB 3.2 Gen 1. That would be still 5 gigabit. What was USB 3.1 Gen 2 becomes USB 3.2 Gen 2. That'll be 10 gigabit still. And then we have USB 3.2 Gen 2, which is new and 20 gigabit, and that is two 10 gigabit connections shotgun together. So USB 3.2 will mean absolutely nothing. It seems to include Type A connections, but in practice I think we're going to see Type C across the piece. So everything marked as USB 3.2 you would expect will be Type C, but there's nothing whatsoever to prevent motherboard manufacturers, I'm thinking in PC terms here, and laptop manufacturers, renaming the connections they already have on their laptops, which are going to be both Type A and Type C, existing USB 3.0 and USB 3.1 as USB 3.2, because they are absolutely identical. This is just stupid. I mean, no two ways about it. This is stupid. They had a scheme that made sense to an extent. Renaming things, rebadging things is a bad idea. I've said this before about one or two companies, and it continues to be a stupid idea. So that's USB 3.2. That will break cover during this year, almost certainly when we see AMD X570 boards at Computex in preparation for Zen 2. Almost certainly they're going to include USB 3.2 and very likely PCI Express 4. And the irony being is the PCI Express 4 slot, which should be the main graphics slot, will almost certainly actually be a PCI Express 3. It's just because it's less than a certain length, about 6 inches as I recall for the traces. That means it will qualify as PCI Express 4. So there's going to be some new numbers coming forward, but they're going to be the same thing. This I predict, and I think this will be true. And then we literally the day after we heard about USB 3.2, we were told that USB 4 will be coming along. But whereas USB 3.0, 3.1, 3.2, it's USB, gap, and then the bit, the numbers. USB 4 is all closed up, so it's USB 4 in one. Why? Goodness knows, it may change. That is going to be, the specification will be announced in a few months' time, so I guess again around about Computex. And then we're going to expect to see it break cover end of 2020 or maybe going on sale early 2021. These things take at least 18 months to come to market, so specification followed by, and that is actually interesting, genuinely interesting. So for one thing, double the speed of the fastest USB 3.2, so 40 gigabit connection or up to, which is fast. You can guarantee that's going to be Type C only, and the thing is that USB 4 incorporates Thunderbolt 3, which again, word salad and acronym city. The thing is, Thunderbolt 3 is an Intel technology. Intel said back in 2017 that they were going to open up the Thunderbolt specification and make it available to all. They did not say for free or on what terms, but they used those words. And it turns out they actually meant the best possible way. Intel's press release came through today after the news at USB 4 yesterday. And Intel, one phrase from it is that this move enables other chip makers to build Thunderbolt-compatible silicon royalty-free. I don't see any way of wrangling that such that it comes out badly. That sounds to me like Intel has done a good thing, and the thing here is that this means that, as I understand it, if AMD builds connections that are USB 4 fully compliant, and they therefore use Thunderbolt 3, it means you can take existing Thunderbolt 3 devices such as RAID arrays, external housings for SSDs, or eGPUs, which currently do not work on AMD because the software doesn't allow it, because the Intel drivers say, no, Intel only, mate. You better plug those in as USB 4 devices and they'll work happily. If that's not the case, then I'm missing something. But as things stand, that sounds really good news. That means that USB is going to get faster. The difference between Thunderbolt and USB should evaporate. Everything will be Type-C. It does mean we're going to have Type-C connections and not necessarily know what the heck they do, whether they're, how much power they can handle, what data transfer, what's compatible, what isn't. But it gives you hope that, albeit 18 to 24 months time, that things are going to get better. So USB 3.2 during this year sounds like a joke. But in time, USB 4 and Thunderbolt 3, that sounds really positive. I'm happy about that. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Look around, there's a subscribe button. Hit that bell button. We'll tell you about new videos as they become available. I'm Leo Walder for Kit Guru. This is Leo Says.